I'm Chris Miller. I'm the manager of the Cape May Plant Materials Center, which is operated by the USDA NRCS, one of 25 plant materials centers around the country. There's operated by the USDA NRCS. And while I'm thinking about it, I just want to mention there are only 2 out of the 25 plant centers. That's us in Cape May and our Louisiana Plant Center, which is about an hour southwest of New Orleans, that focus on coastal issues. So each plant materials center around the country focuses on resource concerns within a service area that they're within the area that they're located. It just so happens that Cape May is located in southern New Jersey, and we were established about 52 years ago to specifically look at coastal issues, and we've been doing that ever since. I haven't been there that long, but they've been working on it. All right, I'm going to be talking about coastal plant materials that can be used and serve as transitional buffers between wetland and upland situations that can provide ecosystem services, protect natural resources, as well as potentially provide diversification and on-farm income to a farmer. In our 2014 climate adaptation plan, I pulled out some of the aspects of that plan that deal directly with coastal issues. You know, storms are going to increase with damaging winds. We've seen that in the last couple of weeks with the 3 nor'easters we've had, with the potential 4th one coming next week possibly. Sea levels are projected to rise 6 to 8 inches over the next 40 years. And the resulting impacts are these things that are listed here with, salinization of near coastal waters, i.e. farming. If you're farming in an area that is impacted by saltwater, increased frequency, of course, of flooding, changes in plant adaptability. So we're looking at maybe bringing some more southern adapted plants further north to provide some stabilization and some help us with identifying some problem resources and helping us solve some of those issues. Increased competition from weeds and invasive plants, and increased soil health challenges. So these are all issues that our Plant Materials Center is looking at as far as projects, studies, demonstrations, producing technical information. Just to show you sort of a mosaic of farmland, this is in the Delaware Bay shore of southern New Jersey, very similar across the bay in the state of Delaware, but you see the tidal marsh and the tidal creeks that go up through the landscape here, and then the mosaic of farmland around that. Increasingly, we're seeing problems with that farmland being impacted by saltwater. Well, in NRCS, we look at how plant solutions can be used to address conservation problems, and we have these resource concerns that have been identified in NRCS, and those would be soil erosion. So we have bank erosion along streams and tributaries and tidal shorelines, soil quality degradation due to salts increasing in concentration, and water quality degradation. And most of these resource concerns can be taken care of or remediated or ameliorated with plants. This is a shot of a sod farm in southern New Jersey on the Cape May County and northern Cape May County Cumberland County border that's being impacted by saltwater inundation. See, here's the sod production here, the turf grass, and you see the browned areas in the front and the area along this road here. In the background, you can see the dead trees. This borders right on the tidal marsh of the Delaware Bay, and with increased frequency of storms, intensity of storms, this producer is being impacted by the saltwater that's coming onto the property. So, sort of to cut to the chase, if I run out of time, cut to the chase on the whole core of what I'm proposing today and what I'm talking about is that rather than abandon this land completely, you might not be able to grow a sod crop on it because it's too salty, but you could come in and plant a plant such as Spartina patens, salt hay, salt meadow cordgrass, and actually manage that as a hay crop. There's a high demand for salt hay, but there's very few farmers that can get into the natural marsh anymore and harvest salt hay because of the storm damage to dikes and levees and the increased sea level. And so these wetlands, these natural wetlands, are too wet to go in and harvest the salt hay, which has been an industry in southern New Jersey for probably over 100 years or so. So the idea is, so if we move like a little bit further upland, there's potential opportunities to actually go in and intentionally plant a salt hay crop and actually harvest it, provide the hay, and also you could even harvest the plants to be used in other restoration projects around the area. So it's an alternative, diversification, alternative crop that a farmer could use. And we haven't looked at all the economics or the market analysis, or some of this is just conceptual at this point, but it's certainly a feasible possibility, because we at the Plant Materials Center have production of, for example, the salt hay crop there, or salt meadow cordgrass, which we could provide starter material to a grower in order to establish a crop. So do we need to really abandon these lands? We can we can maybe, on the short term, we can mitigate for the salt impact. This is a cornfield in Sussex County, Delaware, that's been impacted by salt. So obviously, you may have some short-term fixes to mitigate for the salt impact in those fields. And here's just a list of things that have been recommended or proposed in the literature and in extension bulletins and things. Not all these fixes will work in all circumstances, so it's really site-specific, it's soil-specific, it's producer-specific. But these are some things that are short-term mitigation fixes. But I'm focusing a little bit more, the rest of my talk here on establishing salt-tolerant native plant buffers that may have some alternative income for the farm and diversify the farm operation, rather than just abandoning these salt-impacted areas. Here's another, I believe this slide is from Dr. Jack Gallagher at the University of Delaware, Halophyte Biotechnology Lab. So rather than have a situation where, in a cornfield, you have Phragmites taking over, which is an invasive wetland plant, you plant something intentionally in this area to sort of hold off the invasion of Phragmites, to serve as a transition between that wetland area and that cropland area. And I'm just going to mention a few other options or a few other opportunities that may serve that purpose. So I already mentioned establishing a salt meadow cordgrass or salt hay crop. What I didn't say earlier when I was talking about that is, right now, if you were to go out and there are a few folks that supply it in southern New Jersey, it's running between $15 and $20 a bale. The reason why it's so expensive is that it's in short supply, so it's all a supply-demand. People still want it. And it still serves a purpose. It's a great mulch for strawberry crops, for instance. It's got multiple uses, but there's just not much of a supply of it out there, so the cost is very, very high. There's some other opportunities to grow some native shrubs for what we refer to as soil bioengineering applications. So basically, you're harvesting stems of shrubs while they're dormant, and you're using those stems that have some rooting ability to help control shoreline erosion, shoreline or stream bank erosion. And some of the plants that serve that purpose are listed here. Groundsel is a coastal shrub that grows in the tidal areas, high tide bush as well. Willows are more of a freshwater, but maybe we can identify some willow species or a genotype that has a little bit more salt tolerance. That's the kind of thing we do. At our plant center, we do natural selection. So we look at what's occurring naturally in nature, selecting for certain traits that might help us solve a particular problem, and then we increase that material, provide it to the commercial grower industry, and then the commercial grower industry increases it and makes it available for projects. Another potential option would be planting a bioenergy crop, which could be used on farm. Things like native warm season grasses like switchgrass, coastal panic grass, prairie cordgrass. These are all native warm season grasses that produce a lot of biomass that could be harvested and either direct burned or pelletized. And there is pelletization equipment out there that's not really too expensive. There was a project up in the Endless Mountains of the Poconos where the farmer actually, he had some grant money to do a demo project, but he established a field of switchgrass. I think it was only about 15 acres in size. He harvested that switchgrass after it was well established, after like 2 to 3 years, and he pelletized that switchgrass and was able to provide his own on-farm energy just from that 15-acre field of switchgrass. So similarly, along tidal areas where you may be losing that production or in that transition zone that is affected by saltwater, all three of these plants have some salt tolerance and could be used in that same fashion. Here's just an example of a natural stand of Spartina Alterniflora out here in the intertidal zone, and just above that is the Spartina patens. And this is the material that is harvested primarily for salt hay. And this is the material that we have selected and developed and released a variety we call Avalon, which originated from Avalon, New Jersey. And it kind of takes on this form. It's a very fine textured, fine stemmed. It kind of flops over when it gets a little taller. So ideally, if we were to possibly establish a crop of this in somebody's field to harvest as a hay crop, we may prefer to use another variety called Flagio, which is much more upright, it's much more stiffer stemmed, and would probably produce more biomass as a hay crop than this material, than our material that flops over. So I guess my point is variety matters. Selection matters, variety matters, the morphology and trait of that particular plant species matters. So these are all things that we're looking at. Here's an example of the groundsel bush and a close-up of the willow stems when they're harvested and cut when dormant, which could provide some potential on-farm, off-season on-farm income. Here's how they're used. They're cut with at the base with a chainsaw. They're perennial, so they'll come back every year. And then on an eroded stream bank or an area that's being restored or stabilized, you can lay these dormant stems down against the bare soil, tie it all down with a grid of stakes and twine and wire, and there's all kinds of different methods of doing this. But the stems will sprout at the nodes and produce new growth. So the portion of the stems that's in contact with the soil will develop roots, and then the top growth will grow, and the portion of the stems that's exposed to the air, and then you'll have voila, you'll have a stand of willow, or whatever species you're looking at. Okay, 5 minutes. All right. Okay, so high tide, so these are the three species I talked about for potential biomass production. Switchgrass is shown to grow in saltwater concentrations as high as about 28 parts per thousand. Seawater is 35, so pretty close to seawater, back bay, as well as in freshwater, as well as in dry soil. So it has a lot of variation, a lot of variety of environmental site conditions that it can grow, as well as these other two species. Eastern Gamagrass is another native warm season grass that has some level of salt tolerance that can be used in that same fashion. So it's the Arenchyma roots. These types of roots are thicker straw-like roots that allow for oxygen exchange in saturated soils that allow these plants to grow in wetter soil conditions. And we're also looking at the root structure. And we did a study with USDA ARS, the pasture lab at Penn State, a few years ago in cooperation with them. And we looked at these native warm season grass buffers in a riparian zone and looked at survival, vigor, and yield over a 2-year period in the field. And the top 3 performing species were those that I've already mentioned, the switchgrass, the prairie cordgrass, and the eastern gamagrass. And as it turns out, all 3 of those species have some level of salt tolerance. So they're very well adapted to this situation. We're also looking at using these same species as well as a few others to hold off the invasive spread of Phragmites. And we have a study right now that we're looking at interplanting these different species and also using them as monocultures to see which ones do a better job of holding off the spread of Phragmites in an area that Phragmites is either killed with an herbicide or mowed intensely prior to establishing the desirable native plant. One other plant I want to mention that it's not our project, but we're working cooperatively with the University of Delaware Halophyte Biotechnology Lab in Lewis, Delaware, is seashore mallow. And the folks there, Dr. Jack Gallagher and Denise Salskar, have spent probably a couple decades looking at this particular plant to serve in this the same purpose that I've mentioned those other plants in that transitional zone, to provide ecosystem services, to improve the environment, and potentially an income-producing plant. So it is a perennial. It lives 10 years. It's very salt-tolerant. It's a pollinator plant, so it attracts pollinators as well as it self-pollinates itself, so it produces a lot of seed whether it's pollinated or not. And the stems can be used as well as the seed itself. It's a high oil content seed, which could be potentially used for a biodiesel crop. And also the stems could be used as an absorbent material, or cat litter, or bedding for poultry litter houses, or boiler houses. So it can be planted with a typical grain drill. And this is a farm in Sussex County, Delaware, where it was planted on the edge of the field, where they were having saltwater inundation issues. And here's what the crop looks like shortly after it germinates and grows. A little bit later in the season, and when it's flowering. And here's a solid stand of the seashore mallow. So it's a natural wetland plant that occurs from about New Jersey south through the Gulf states, down the Atlantic and then through the Gulf states to Texas. Oh, here's a picture of it being insect pollinated, but it's also self-pollinated. If it doesn't get insect pollinated, these anthers will bend and attach pollen to the stigmas and pollinate itself. It can be harvested with a typical harvester and windrowed. And so you've got both the seed that's being harvested as well as the potential hay crop or use for material for grinding up for litter. That's just a close-up of the regrowth that occurs because it's a perennial plant that will regrow every year. It can be pelletized and used for feed. And then there's some research that was done on this particular plant. This happens to be a research report on the production of biodiesel and ethanol from the seed as a feedstock for biodegradable absorbents. So the stems have a very, this is just a micrograph, electron micrograph of the close-up of the stem, which you see that the cells absorb. It has a lot of surface area to absorb whatever you're using it to absorb, whether it's cat litter or poultry waste and that sort of thing. It's also been tested as a poultry house bedding, and it's shown to actually reduce the downgrade of the dermatitis on the foot pads of the chickens themselves. You see, this was the most desirable product to use for that. The sawdust wasn't too bad, but those two products were much better than the pine shavings and the switchgrass bedding, actually. So this whole idea of establishing a salt-tolerant plant that grows in this transition zone that could potentially be harvested, that could refresh, and this is a term that Dr. Jack Gallagher uses, sort of refresh the area, because you're taking material off. It's not just recycling the nutrients right on site, you're actually taking material off. So a refreshable buffer is sort of the terminology he uses. And sort of looking at graphically, you have your water body, whether it's an ocean or a bay, and then you have your wetland area that rims that, and then you have these either natural buffers or intentionally planted buffers that serve as transition between your terrestrial ecosystem or your cropland. The blue line is the normal tide zone. The red line would be the storm tide zone. So you have these, what you're doing is you're managing this area right here to serve as that transition between the wetland and the upland. So why grow these salt-tolerant coastal plants? Well, for diversification, off-season income as a specialty crop, could be a benefit to limited resource farmers, developing new markets for some of these materials, like the bioengineering materials. The plant materials program can provide starter plants to get production started. And also we provide technical support and production guidelines for these conservation plant materials.
Yeah, I was just curious, if I'm a farmer and I have some issues and I go to an extension agent, how do they access your assistance?
Our plant center works through the network of USDA service centers. So ideally it would be through the service centers. We make them aware of our products and services. If we do a good job, we should be doing a good job of letting them know that I'm talking about our own people in the service centers, that we have this we are a resource in this area. Then if the producer is eligible for, or just wants information, certainly we can provide that, but if they're eligible for any farm programs, farm bill programs, conservation programs, they could be directed by the field office staff on what programs they may be eligible for, and then we get integrated into that if in fact they want to grow the conservation plans, or establish conservation plans.
You provide starter material, you said?
Typically, we provide starter material to growers, to nurserymen and seed producers that then provide materials to whoever's planting it, whatever projects there are. So we would provide small quantities, like we're interested in doing more demos. So we would actually provide starter material and actually do some planting for, like that sod farmer I showed in southern New Jersey. I'm trying to get him to be a cooperator site. He's a cooperator already with us, with NRCS. but I'm trying to convince him to help him establish that buffer of salt meadow hay, to see what's involved in doing that, what's the time involved, the labor involved, how many plants we need per acre, how long it takes to get a harvestable crop, all those sorts of things. And once we work with a few growers like that, we can develop more technical information and more specific guidance, and then move forward with this whole process.
So I'm with the Southeast Hub, and you mentioned earlier there's another plant material center in Louisiana that covers coastal resources. So do y'all, as far as like the different seashores go, do y'all have a boundary? Go to both of you?
Yeah, I guess, the Louisiana Plant Materials Center covers the Gulf Coast, pretty much the whole, from Florida all the way over to Texas, and, our service area is extended down to North Carolina, actually, and however, we also have, even though our center in Georgia, we have a plant center in Georgia, Americus, Georgia, which is south of Atlanta. They don't focus on specific coastal issues, but they do have some information on that. And that Flagio variety that I showed for the salt meadow hay, that's actually was selected by them back in I think it was in the late 80s, early 90s. So they could provide some assistance too. But I guess, and even our Florida Plant Materials Center in Brooksville, which is just north of Tampa, they also dabble in some of the coastal stuff, but that's not their prime priority. So really, Louisiana, us, Brooksville, Florida, and Americus, between all those 4 plant material centers, we could get the information needed and the plants needed to do projects.
I was wondering, do they use Alterniflora as a hay or only patents?
Well, I think it's been harvested as a hay crop also in a natural marsh, or where it's mixed. You'll get both species in there. But I think it's pretty much it's the Spartina patens that's known as the prime salt hay crop. But obviously you get a mix of disticulus in there, you get a mix of Alterniflora in there. Yeah, salt meadow hay has been used as packing material. It's been used to cure concrete. It's been used as a forage for livestock, because livestock used to graze in the marshes in southern New Jersey anyway, back in the early 1900s. And it's used as a mulch. And nowadays it's more commonly used as a mulch, and a very desirable mulch from that standpoint. People seek it out, but when they find out that they can barely get it and it costs $20 a bale, they're a little less likely to use it. But I think we have some opportunities to actually intentionally plant it and harvest it just like a farmer would harvest a field of orchard grass and timothy. It's just in a little bit different environment, that's all.